a minute or two more before we get fully started. But we've got some good people joining us already. Good to see. And I think some people who've been here before are back. That's good. Good to see you again. Hope everyone's having a lovely summer in this crazy world. But it's great to have you here and joining us on a Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. We're asking a lot of you, so we appreciate that. First, let me just highlight, we have the chat function open there. I went ahead and put my information, and also our wonderful co-leader today, Neelu, has put in her information. We forgot to put in a slide with that. That was my fault. So we just wanted you to have that. So if you have any follow-up questions or anything like that, it's just there in the chat, and you can shoot us an email if you have any follow-up questions that we don't bring up. All right. Well, let's see. We've had one more person join us. Maybe wait just another minute. And also just a quick reminder, you probably do see up there that we are recording this session. So if you do need to leave for any reason, we will be posting this on the UAB Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research YouTube site. So you can go to our YouTube channel and watch any of our summer workshops there. If there are particular things that you wanted to refresh or things that you missed, feel free to go back to our YouTube channel and you can capture all of that there. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started so we can stay on time. Again, my name is Gareth Jones. I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research. You see my email there is ghjones@uab.edu. And this is our third workshop in a series of 8 for this summer of 2020. And we're excited to be able to offer them in a virtual environment so that you can join us from wherever you are. In fact, we sometimes get students from all over the country with this, which is great. So thank you all for joining us. This week, we're talking about research, ethics, and professionalism. This is really one of the cornerstones of doing research. This is a very important workshop, so we're especially glad that you're here for this one. And for the first section of it, I'm going to go over now and hand over the time to Neelu, who will introduce herself, tell you a little bit about her role in our office, as well as the research that she did as an undergraduate. It's good to hear her story, and then she'll start the slides. Thanks, Neelu.
Hey, my name is Neelu Varghese. I'm a Vista with the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research. I recently graduated from UAB, and I was doing research with copper transporters and schizophrenia. Yeah, I mean, that would be my intro. If you guys have any questions about doing research as an undergrad or getting involved with AmeriCorps, I'll be happy to answer any questions. If only I could. What do you guys think an ethical dilemma is? Can anybody tell me? Well, I mean, generally, an ethical dilemma is basically a situation where you have to make a difficult choice, and it usually has something to do with, like, morally, there might be something that's right or wrong, and yeah. And how do you think we would solve them? Do any of you have any suggestions? You can type it in the chat if you want. I mean, they could have discussions, they could have rules, there could be other things that are involved. So, yeah. So first of all, deontology versus consequentialism. So there are two different uh, areas of moral thinking. One is deontology, which comes from the Greek word for duty or obligation. And it basically judges people based on the morality behind the action. So it says there are certain rules you have to follow, and that is what's moral. This is basically motive based. So what is your reason behind doing this? Like, is that moral? Whereas consequentialism, it basically judges an action based on what the consequence is. For example, how many lives are saved. There, the main form of consequentialism is called utilitarianism, and this is basically you maximize the amount of happiness or maximize the amount of good that's done, um, uh, and minimize the harm. So, how many of you guys have, well, how many of you guys have ever heard about the trolley problem? The trolley problem basically says that there's a trolley coming down the tracks, and it's coming towards about 5 people who are stuck on the tracks. You can do something to switch the trolley to another track, but the other track has 1 person there. What are you gonna do? Would it be right to switch the track? Would it be right to just keep it going that way? Well, according to deontology, there's rules. So it may be right to switch the track because you save lives, or it's wrong to switch the track because it's already going that way. Why do you have to get the other person involved? In consequentialism, you definitely have to switch the track because you're minimizing the number of lives that are harmed. You're saving more lives. So let's go to an actual case study. Bad blood. So researchers wanted to study the effects of having bad blood. The researchers enrolled poor and disadvantaged patients and told them they were being treated for bad blood. However, researchers deliberately withheld treatments. This case study was the Tuskegee syphilis study. They called syphilis bad blood alongside many other diseases, actually. It was also associated with having migraines and other problems. And they focused the study on poor African Americans with advanced syphilis. They were told they were being treated for their bad blood, but deliberately they were untreated to see the long-term effects of infection even when the treatment became available. The study involved over 400 men and their families. After this was revealed, the families actually took the U.S. government to court. And they actually won the case, and the U.S. government basically provided health care for the families. And now there are only 2 of the relatives of the Tuskegee syphilis patients that are still alive. So after this, the Belmont Report was released. And the report was a statement of ethical principles and guidelines that guide the resolution of ethical problems that arise from human research. And it basically put together 3 principles. The first principle was respect for persons. Individuals should be treated as autonomous agents. Persons with diminished autonomy are entitled to protection, and there should be informed consent. Second, beneficence. You shouldn't do harm, and you should maximize the possible benefits and minimize possible harms. And third, justice. Benefits and burdens of research should be distributed fairly. So another side effect of the Belmont Report is that it ended up leading to the formation of the IRB in universities. The IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and they basically review the studies that are done in universities to make sure that they're within moral boundaries. They look into things like risk versus benefits, human research studies, informed consent and documentation, privacy and confidentiality, and monitoring of research overall. So, animal research. Animals can't really consent. So, what do we do to make sure that we protect these animals? So, to protect animals in the case of animal research, there was a committee called Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee that are in universities. Each university would have these, and they would look into the moral, whether each of the research was moral. And what they were primarily looking for was that, one, there was a reduction in the use of methods that obtain the same information from pure animals. That reduction. So there was the use of methods that obtain the same information from pure animals. There was replacement, which means you considered methods that avoid or replace the need to use higher animals in research. And there was refinement. So the use of methods that minimize pain, suffering, and distress and or enhance the welfare of animals. Now, how does this apply to you, Gareth? Gareth, you're muted right now.
There we go. I had unmuted and then I muted myself. All right. Before we go to the next slide, though, I just want to ask you all if you can, the Tuskegee syphilis incident. I mean, that is fairly well known, and it seems like it was a long time ago, and we think, oh, we've fixed this, but these sorts of things are still happening. Can anyone give me an example of a more recent ethical, moral issue that has come up? Can anyone think of any others that are more recent? Feel free to chime in, or you can type it in. Definitely. Melinda Gates. Kiara, do you want to expand on that? Do you mind talking about it? Or I'm sorry, it's Kiana. Sorry, it's so small there. So yeah, share with us Melinda Gates and that issue.
Okay, so the thing is, she wants to make the claim that when they have the vaccine for the coronavirus, she wants healthcare workers to get it first, but she says after that, she wants all the Black people to be required to take it, which is kind of iffy because we know about the Tuskegee thing and we know what's going on. So what are you really trying to do that you want to just direct it to one certain race? So that's why I was kind of a little annoyed when I saw it. So sorry if my face.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up, and that's why I wanted to bring up this moment where we could discuss just that this isn't just something that happened in the past, that this is ongoing. And that's one of the main reasons why, how does this apply to me is like we have to be vigilant. And, there's another huge case, and I know we want to stay on time, but, the Henrietta Lacks story is another really important one to know about. Have any of you ever heard about the Henrietta Lacks issue?
I've heard of it.
Oh, tell us what you've heard about it.
We had to read a book about it, but she died, but it was like weird. It was like her cells, I guess they were saying like didn't die, and then they used that to like do experiments and research without the consent of her family. Like they couldn't get her consent; she was already dead, but they didn't consent with her family.
Absolutely, and again, this is something that started in the 50s, where she had cervical cancer, and so they gathered her cells, and but they then didn't, without telling her, kept using and regenerating her cells for all sorts of other experiments, from things like polio, Jonas Salk. We've heard about the polio vaccination. That came from that. And even as recently, just in the very last decade, people were still using her gene, now with gene splicing, all these new things, and they still were not giving the family informing the family and compensating, all of these things that the Belmont Report was supposed to address, it's still ongoing. And Henrietta Lacks, there was a movie made about it. It's fairly well known. Oprah Winfrey played the role, but only recently has the family really regained control over that. About their family's genetic material, and so these research misconduct things, they aren't just something in the past, it's ongoing. And so that's something I really want you to think about, why it's important. Even think about, maybe some of you also had seen a show called The Good Place. The Good Place took a lot of those philosophical things and put them into this kind of world where people had to make these decisions. There's a couple episodes dedicated just to the trolley dilemma. But, what we're living through right now with COVID-19, how this affects, so I'm so glad you brought up the Melinda Gates issue, but that's going to be ongoing. How we solve this problem as a society, these things need to be thought about and discussed. So very pertinent for today. I just wanted to emphasize that. All right, next slide, please. All right, so research misconduct and some of those things we were just talking about, it can also be split into three things. And these are things that you're going to encounter as you're doing research. And some of these terms you're going to be familiar with, but you can really break it down to kind of these three different things: fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. So we're going to go through a few exercises with this as well. But with fabrication, you're just making up the data, right, to get to something that you feel like you need, all right? And there's all sorts of ethical issues with that, if it's to get funding, to pass a class, there's all sorts of ways where data is made up. And of course, that is, research misconduct. You can also distort it, falsification, or you can leave out data so that you can, again, get the story that you want to tell. So falsification, and it can very often, they can be paired together. And the last one is plagiarism, which I'm sure is one you've heard of quite a bit, especially in relation to writing. Students are asked to submit papers to, different platforms that check for plagiarism and all of those things. But it's also a huge issue in research, specifically a lot with research articles and that sort of thing, because there's a lot of pressure in the research world to get published. And so some of these things, people do this. Can any of you think of another example of either fabrication or falsification of a kind of a famous study right now that still affects a lot of things? Can anyone think of an example? Well, Neelu, can you think of one? I'm putting you on the spot.
One thing that comes to mind is the autism vaccine study.
Yes. Expand on that for us, will you, if you can?
Yeah. So there was a researcher in Britain who conducted studies on autism and vaccines. And he basically correlated, or he said that vaccines were causing autism, but they ended up finding that he fabricated a lot of the data, and it was completely false. But a lot of people still use that to say that vaccines are causing autism. So
absolutely, that's a great example. That's one I was thinking of as well. All right, next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so at UAB, and if there are those of you who are joining from other schools as well, I'm sure there's a similar code of conduct at your institution. But this just kind of outlines those who are at UAB that you are not, you're committed, and you sign this, right? That you're not going to fabricate information, you're not going to knowingly change or omit information, misrepresent events. circumstances, results, or outcomes in all of the records. That could be in a lab book, that could be in a journal article, that could be in a paper that is submitted. And you're not going to take credit for another's work or work product as one's own without permission. Last week, and we're going to talk a little bit about lab books here. Again, lab books are the property of the PI, the principal investigator. So if you were to take information from there and not give credit or not have permission to use that, you could get into some serious trouble. And vice versa too. And this can be an issue too, that maybe you have a PI and you're doing some research, but they don't give you credit for it, all right? That is another form of plagiarism, where you're not giving credit for it. So anyway, we have that code of conduct at UAB. If you're from another institution, I'm sure there's something similar, but it's good to know about it and use it as a reference point. Next slide, please. All right, so here's a case. We kind of went over those different types of misconduct, but let's read this case, and then you can type in the chat which of the three, and it could be more than one. It could be multiple, just to give you that option as well. But if you can read through this, and then feel free to chime in the chat which of the three you think it is, or if it's combination. All right, so far we've got consensus. All right, go ahead and hit the button, Neelu. Yes, absolutely. That's plagiarism. And just so you know, you can plagiarize yourself even, okay? So if you take work that you did before and then you use it again, but you don't cite where you originally did that, that's another form of plagiarism. And you're familiar with that. I mean, you know, sometimes students will take one paper for one class and submit it for another class. We know that's not right. So, all right, here's research misconduct case number 2. So let's read through this, and you can put in the chat which you think it is. All right. And again, this is based, sadly, on a real case. As you can see, they put the Blazer logo there. But it's actually a combination, as you can see. So, yes, it is falsification by manipulating, but it's fabrication as well by not giving credit and that sort of thing. So, what do you think the motive is behind this sort of thing, though? What do you think the motive is? I think you can probably guess it just there in the article. All right. Yes. Money, money, money. And grants, okay? And absolutely. That is a huge motivator. But of course, this scientist's career is over at this point, right? This is they can lose. They're not going to get rehired. They're going to lose their position. So it's a short-term gain for a lifelong loss. So you know, it's definitely, you know, not worth doing for sure. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so now we're going into the lab a little bit here. We've got Mr. Pickle from Rick and Morty. Let's go to the next slide. So lab transparency. We talked last week a lot about lab notebooks when we talked about kind of lab basics 101, and I just talked about how the lab notebook is the property of the PI and why it is so vital and important to document everything accurately, to have it in pen. that's one, so it can't be fabricated or falsified. You can't omit data. That's why you put a big X so people know, okay, we finished it for this day, we're moving on to the next one. You definitely want to make sure that you're transparent in everything that you do. This helps with lots of different things. Yes, it helps with ethics and profession, but definitely with professionalism. But it helps you so that things can be replicated, right? And that's one thing when you put research out there. And that's one thing that happened to this guy who claimed the connection between vaccines and autism is people tried to replicate his experiment. And of course, they got completely different results because he had fabricated and falsified that information. So it's really important to have your lab notebook be transparent and open and accurate, so that, and then of course this helps you in the long run as well, so that when you are trying to write a paper or write a journal article, you've got all that information right there. You can talk about the whole methods and the process. Really helpful that way. Next slide, please. So and dating entries, having the right protocols, as I just said, you should be able to reproduce it. It's not something that just works once. It's got to be able to be done over and over and over. And in order to do that, you have to have the exact information. So the exact type of chemical, the lab that it came from, the right measurement. All of these things are invaluable. You got to write legibly. Although a lot of institutions, including UAB, are moving into digital lab books. Has anyone used a digital lab book? I'm just curious. Not yet. Neelu, did you ever encounter that? No. I know it's a tough transition for a lot of PIs who have been used to having that hard copy and to write in there. You know, and with obviously, digital lab books have some benefits. They also have some challenges. You know, that writing in pen is something that's been, you know, an understood concept with lab books, but you know, there are some challenges there, but they're finding ways to meet that with the digital world, and of course that's the world we're all living in now. But again, making sure everything is accurate in there so that people also can't accuse you of manipulating data. You know, that if you have a gap there that you can't explain, that even if you may not have intentionally done something wrong, it is detrimental to your scientific career, right? That you can't reproduce it accurately. So that's why it's just really, we just want to really emphasize the importance of the lab notebook. Next slide, please. Oh, one last thing in there I forgot to mention, it can be audited. That's another thing, especially with grants. So your PIs, your mentors will also hopefully emphasize that with you, that grant agencies will come in, and also institutions can come in and say, hey, we want to look at that notebook because you did this experiment and you said it this way, we want to try to reproduce it, or we want to make sure that you're doing everything correct because we're giving you lots of money. So auditing is another thing. So that's, you know, another incentive to make sure that your lab notebook is accurate. We're going to move on to professionalism here, but does anyone have I just want to take a quick second just to see if anyone has any questions about ethics and making sure that you're not doing misconduct, anything at all on that. Just want to make sure that, again, feel free at any time if you have a question to type it in the chat or to speak up. We're happy to address those questions along the way. And I'm being purposefully silent here to just check. All right, well, we'll move on to professionalism now. So here you see the definition of professionalism from Merriam-Webster. You know, the conducts, aims, or qualities that characterize or mark a profession or a professional person. So we're going to kind of talk about what that looks like in the research world. Next section, please. So as it says there, a lot of it is kind of common sense, but it's still good to be reminded of these things. So a few words about professionalism. So respecting people's time and being respectful and courteous. So this really applies a lot to kind of the first time that you reach out to a PI or mentor. And I do talk with students a lot about that first email or that first interaction, how important those are. First impressions are first impressions, right? And so that email is really crucial, making sure that you're addressing them either with doctor or Mr. or what have you, so that and that you're respectful of their time. You know, sometimes students want to write a big long email because they're very passionate about research and about how they're connected to it. But that first email is really about trying to let them know that you're concise and precise, is how I put it, that you're introducing who you are, why you are so passionate about their research, and how you can benefit both their lab and how it benefits your own career. So, you know, rather than writing a super long email, that's one way that, you know, PIs, they prefer that. And that's one way to show that you're respectful and courteous. Same thing with meeting with them, that you want to meet during office hours or, you know, through an email correspondence, because a lot of PIs and mentors are quite busy, and it's good to respect that time. But say you get the position and you've done a great job with your interview and you've been offered a position, you know, it's a commitment to do research, and they're making a commitment for you. So it's a job. So just as you would with any job, you want to be accountable, you want to be reliable, and you want to be consistent. That being said, it doesn't, you know, you're still a student, and mentors understand that. But communication is a key part of that, right? So that's being accountable, reliable, and consistent, is that you're consistently communicating if you have a conflict, all of those sorts of things. As you can say, with that communication at the first, it can be formal. But after that, depending on the mentor, it can be more relaxed. I always tell students they can call me by my first name because I'm an advisor as well as a professor. That's, you know, how I kind of create a relationship with students, but not every PI is going to be that way. Some of them will say, I'm Dr. such and such, and that's how you're going to call me. That's fine. I mean, you can respect that and move forward with that. But some of them are going to be more relaxed. You know, you're working in a group in most labs, and there's a dynamic there. We talked about that, what a lab dynamic looks like and how you fit within that. It's good to be aware of that. That helps with that. You know, emails, you know, that is the world of the academic environment. You know, and it's really good to know that and sometimes I'll absolutely say PIs and mentors and faculty can be just horrible in replying to emails. For example, you may send a great email and you may not get a response. It's absolutely fine to send a follow-up email and just to double check, just kind of ask politely, hey, I just want to make sure you had a chance to look at my email. I'm still very interested in the position. You know, after that, you can kind of let it go and move on to a different position to apply for. But if they send you an email, you want to make sure that you respond in a timely manner. So if you've sent out an email, make sure to keep checking that email, just as you would hopefully with a faculty member. You know, it's so different than the world of social media, but with the world of academia, you want to make sure that you're answering your emails as immediately as possible. But as I said, it is a double standard. I'll be honest with you. You know, faculty and mentors and all that, they may not respond immediately. So give them a little bit of time, and then you can have a follow-up. Next slide, please. All right. So some take-home messages, and then I'll kind of open it up for some Q&A here. But as we understand now, with what we went over with all of the ethical and moral issues with science, it's a huge responsibility. Okay, and a lot of this is because, as we talked about, there's been a long history of the scientific community abusing the people in the public, and that you have to know that exists there. This is, I'll be honest with you, again, with UAB, where we're situated in Birmingham, there's a lot of distrust, and that's legitimate distrust, and acknowledging that and making sure that it is a collaborative, mutually beneficial experience. So if you are doing surveys in the community, or if any kind of research in community, you can't just see them as your subject. You have to get consent. You have to make sure that this is something that's beneficial for them. That it's not just, oh, I need to do this research to get this grant or what have you, because there's that long history of distrust that's legitimate. And one way to avoid that, of course, is to have a good knowledge of what these principles are and the practices, the protocol, ways that you can make sure you don't repeat those mistakes that have been made in the past, that you're holding yourself up to a high standard, that you're holding other people up to a high standard. I will say that every once in a while I get students who will contact me that have a concern about something a PI has done, and UAB has an anonymous report system for any kind of ethical or moral issue with research. And it's good to know that there's a process for that, so that if you do witness something, there is a way to report that. Now, going along with that, we just kind of touched on professionalism there at the end, but again, just to remind you that it is a job, that you want to be on time, you want to be respectful of the time of others, that you're part of a work team. Communication is such an important part of that, and all of those things help you develop into a professional, because that's what you're going to be as a researcher, right? You're going to move on to be a professional researcher, so that's the goal. All right, next slide. All right. And that brings us to our wonderful question section. So we have a little bit of time here now. Does anyone have any questions or comments about ethics or professionalism, or about research in general? I'm happy to answer, and Neelu can answer these questions as well. All right, so here's a great question from Mike. I know since we attend UAB, our discussion has been focused on science-based research. I see it similar for the arts and humanities, but do you have, as it pertains to professional ethics in humanities? Absolutely. And my background is I'm a film studies professor, so I work in the humanities, and there definitely are codes of conduct with research. Anytime, so one we didn't go, we touched on the IRB, but anytime you are doing research with humans, and that can be in the humanities, right? You can be going out and conducting interviews. I'll give you an example. There was a playwright up in the Northeast in Boston who was commissioned to write a play about the Boston bombing. And she decided she only had a short amount of time to write this, and she wanted to involve her students. So she asked her students to go out into the community and interview all of those people that were affected by the bombing. And then they used dialogue from those interviews for the play. So, but in order to go out there into the community, she had to teach them about how to collect that data, and they had to go through a process to collect that data, right? To do that research. And of course, the ideas of plagiarism and citing correctly, each discipline has a different format. There's MLA, there's APA, there's different formats for writing, and that plagiarism goes across every discipline, right? So each discipline does have a code of conduct that you need to make sure you're aware of, so that you're citing things properly. Really for every single discipline. So I'm really glad you asked that question. And at UAB, like the Writing Center, the Career Center, and of course, I'm happy to talk with you one-on-one about how that pertains to humanities research. Absolutely. Great question. Other thoughts, comments, or questions? And Mike, if I didn't cover that completely, let me know if you have a follow-up on that. All right, I don't see anything else here. Neelu, before we go, I just want to, maybe you can think about your own experiences as an undergrad. If you ever experienced an issue or where you had to really think, where you were thankful that you had some experience or knowledge about, you know, the ethics and the code of conduct and things like that. Did you ever experience, like, you don't have to use names or anything like that, but maybe you can kind of think about your own past and relate that to folks here.
I didn't have any problems like that, but I do know one individual who she was working in a lab for most of her undergrad, and she had been working in this one researcher's lab, and the researcher, she used the data she collected and had her help writing papers, and then used all this to help another student, a grad student.
Wow.
So that was like, she didn't know whether the professor was allowed to do this or not, but by the time she was about to graduate, she didn't have what was necessary to graduate. So
Oh, wow.
it was a huge burden on her. Like, she ended up
Definitely.
having to leave. So.
Oh my goodness. That's a horror story for sure.
But
That's
she
a
ended
worse.
up loving research, though. She's a grad student now.
Good. Okay. Well, and that's, I'm glad, again, that's one of the reasons we try to offer this. We offer this workshop every single semester, is to make people aware of the process and the expectations. And again, I just emphasize, if you have an issue, there are methods, and I have helped students I have walked them through this where they've had an issue with a PI or something like that. And it's good to know about that going in, because you don't want to be in that situation where you've been in a lab for 3 years, say, and suddenly you have to leave it. You're not getting any letters of recommendation. The work that you've done has been given to someone else, or what have you, or they're using it unethically. You know, it's good to know going in, so hopefully you could be, you can react sooner, and hopefully maybe get into a different lab or report it, so that you know, that doesn't continue. So hopefully, I don't know if it happened in that case, but you know, I will say that that's fairly rare, but I'm not going to deny it as well. I mean, it does happen, and you know, it's important to know about it. So.
I mean, I've worked in 2 different labs before, and in both of them, the PIs worked pretty like close with me to figure out like what I was doing. And they were definitely helpful. And even if the PIs weren't with me, then I either had like grad students or other people in the lab helping me. So yeah, those labs aren't like that at all. So
Yeah. No, absolutely. We're kind of giving worst case scenarios, but it's good to know about those and be able to react to them. So. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. Well, again, we're going to put this recording up with the slides up on our YouTube channel. You have our emails. If you have any more specific questions, feel free to reach out to us. Next week, we're going to be talking about Research 101, which basically kind of walks you through the research process and all different types of research. So I'll be leading that one next week, and Neelu will be back leading that. So we thank you for your time. We know getting up on a Wednesday at 9 o'clock and joining us through Zoom is not the best thing in the world. So we're so excited that you were here with us today, and feel free to follow up with any questions that you have. And thanks again to Neelu for co-leading this. I appreciate it.
actually, I have one more thing.
Oh, great. Yes.
We have service learning info sessions in this afternoon at 1, and you might hear a few things about something like the Clinton Global Initiative and other opportunities you can get involved with research as well. So if you guys want to hear anything about that, I definitely suggest you join us.
Absolutely. Again, I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of the big things about our office is facilitating and supporting and different opportunities. And so if you aren't following, for example, we have a newsletter for both halves of our office where you can find out about these opportunities. We publish this stuff on social media. You know, we try to funnel as many opportunities to students as possible. And we do have, you know, a lot of colleagues that we work with across campus that we can help on those things. So yeah, the CGIU thing is fantastic. That's a great way to combine service learning and research and be able to create an action plan and get support. There's a lot of funding out there for that. So please feel free to follow up with us if you have any questions about those. All right. Well, thanks again. Neelu, thanks for bringing that up. Anything else before we head out? All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. And hopefully we'll see you here next week.
Bye.